your understanding of a balanced diet?
Balanced diet, generally like, food pyramid. So you've got, things that you should be having more than other things. Bread, cereals, try and have more.
Yep.
Things with sugar, high in fat, have less. Have a mixture of all of them there.
What is your understanding of a balanced diet?
It's a good question.
It's a hard one.
It is. It's just ensuring that you've got an equal balance of across all your major food groups.
What's your understanding of a balanced diet?
A mixture of grains, vegetables, fruit, not too much processed food, protein, beans where you can if you don't like meat, that kind of thing.
What's your understanding of a balanced diet?
Good share of fruit, meats, veggies, a bit of dairy.
Perfect.
Yeah, all sort of nice even balance of the whole lot, I believe.
What is your understanding of a balanced diet?
A good mix of grains and dairy, vegetable
Diet.
The way I look at a balanced diet would be eating a bit of everything. Like, I suppose, go off what the government says.
Everyday truths are a funny thing. Sometimes we believe so long in something we never really question it or consider maybe it's just a way of thinking. Take the so-called balanced diet. A core belief is that it involves eating across a wide range of food groups, such as grain, dairy, and protein-rich foods. This belief has been around for so long we never think to question it or even suspect it may have a lot to answer for. Yet how balanced is this approach? Does balance in our diet really depend upon eating across a range of food groups? Could this belief about food even be a factor in high levels of chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, and cancer? Such questions fascinated me, so I went on a search to find answers. I wondered how this everyday belief that a balanced diet is linked to food groups became so firmly entrenched in our minds. And in hunting for answers, the more I look, the more I seem to find. But who am I? Let me introduce myself. I'm Amanda Willemyns. I'm a baby boomer who loves to empower others to get healthier and happier so they can enjoy life more and just feel great. I'm a psychologist on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. I love spending time at its stunning beaches, its mountains, and its rainforest areas. However, in my spare time, I also like to research health and well-being. Today, I'm sharing with you the truth I discovered about food groups. So where did it all begin? I tracked the notion of food groups all the way back to 1916. This concept came from the United States Department of Agriculture. It began publishing dietary guidelines which it updates periodically to this very day. These guidelines are well regarded by the general public and health professionals and continue to influence nutritional advice around the world. These guidelines also form the basis of feeding programs in hospitals, prisons, and schools. You might be wondering why dietary guidelines are being issued by a Department of Agriculture. To understand that, it's important to realise that since 1862, the USDA has had a dual role. On the one hand, its role has been to ensure a secure and sufficient food supply. This has meant supporting and facilitating the various branches of agricultural industry, meat, dairy, grain, sugar. On the other hand, its role has also been to issue useful information on subjects connected with agriculture. As others have noted, this clause has been interpreted as a mandate to deliver dietary advice. So for over a century, the same department that promotes agricultural production has also been responsible for issuing regular updates on what everyone should be eating. This situation sets up a conflict of interest. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Way back in 1916, Carolyn Hunt in the Bureau of Home Economics at the USDA wrote a pamphlet titled Food for Young Children. A year later, she co-authored a 14-page booklet for the wider public called How to Select Foods. Both of these guides set important precedents for the way nutrition was to be conceptualized for the next 100 years. Because both of these guides categorized food into groups, yet there was no real science behind this move. The 5 groups listed were fruit and vegetables, meat and other protein-rich foods, cereals, sweets, and fatty foods. The category of sweets may seem odd today, where the general advice is to reduce our intake of sugary food. But the actual grouping of foods over the last century has been puzzling and even seems arbitrary. As we mentioned, it started with 5 food groups in the US, then it went to 12, dropped to 7, then 4, then back to 5, and then 6. Globally, there are now between 3 to 6 food groups, depending on where in the world you happen to live. I mean, really? What are we talking about here? The numbers seem so random. At one point, butter was in a group by itself, and the same with potatoes. Grouping butter and potatoes into their own food group may seem strange now, even comical, but the food groups of today are just as out of touch. Consider grain, for example. Historically, across various countries, grain products appear in their own food group. Grain having its own category suggests that it is essential for a balanced diet. But is it? Whole populations, such as the traditional islanders in New Guinea, live grain-free and dairy-free too, I might add, and yet have an impressive health profile. Indeed, the logic or evidence for grain having its own food group remains obscure. I couldn't find it anywhere. I can recall the food pyramid of the 90s recommending between 6 and 11 servings of grain a day. At the time, I thought I could never consume that amount of grain. 11 servings of grain a day? Is it even possible to eat that much? And why? I wondered what was really going on. How was it that an idea, born in a conflict of interest and with very little evidence behind it, how is this idea able to penetrate our minds and become an everyday belief? Was it simply a case of groupthink? So I looked deeper at the historical context in which food groups took hold. I figured that as this concept evolved in the 20th century, it would help to understand how people were thinking and feeling back then to appreciate its phenomenal uptake. And the more I looked into it, the belief of food groups emerged simply as a product of 20th century thinking. For example, at this time, the state began playing an increasing role in public health interventions. This was the century that saw major government programs, such as mass vaccinations to curb infectious diseases like smallpox, polio, and diphtheria. The state also addressed nutritional deficiencies, such as pellagra, which is due to insufficient niacin, a B vitamin. Rates of pellagra were significantly decreased in the 1920s via government recommendations of adding niacin to flour. A similar US policy to address iodine deficiencies further saw the fortification of salt with iodine. The context of the state taking an increasing role in public health interventions, and particularly ones relating to food supply, is significant for understanding why everyday people embrace this state-endorsed diet. The landscape of the 20th century suggested that governments played a role in improving the health of its people, thereby building public acceptance of its advice. In other words, amidst a growing record of governments of the day taking measures to improve the health of its citizens and being successful in achieving that role, the public were predisposed to embrace the government's idea of a balanced diet. However, the 20th century also saw 2 world wars. During the wars, people at home became accustomed to government regulations on everyday consumption. For instance, to make efficient use of scarce commodities, rationing was implemented in many countries around the world. Rationing meant that food items such as butter, eggs and milk were meted out to the public in government-specified amounts. Psychologically, the World Wars facilitated the process whereby the state shaped the dietary habits of its citizens. Through rationing, the public became used to state leadership on consumption, including what was eaten on a daily basis. As an offshoot, the public was primed inadvertently to adopt the notion of food groups, as it too came from a government-run food program. The 20th century also saw major advances in many areas, such as transport, production, and communication. These changes set up new conditions of social belief, whereby the public became receptive to the idea of experts and their specialised knowledge. Previously, the home and local community had been the main source of knowledge and information. But in the 20th century, technology was revolutionising daily life. And in this context, people might assume that governments would offer nutritional advice that was based on the latest science. Science has always held a privileged status. We are more receptive to information if we think it is scientifically based. However, as we noted earlier, any assumption that the concept of food groups originated from robust science was totally erroneous. Yet in the wider picture of social and technological forces transforming life last century, the public became psychologically receptive to expert advice and the authority of science. In these ripe conditions, the concept of food groups gained an aura of credibility. In fact, from my research, the idea of food groups emerged more as a byproduct of a range of extraneous factors, social, political, historical, and actually had little to do with nutrition. Indeed, the idea that a balanced diet consists of eating across a range of food groups appears to do more harm than good, and not just for us, but also for the planet. My next video in this series will expand on these themes and will explain what really is a balanced diet if you just go on the evidence. The true answer may surprise you. Unfortunately, however, we've run out of time today. Thank you for your interest in this video series. I appreciate your feedback too, so feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested, you can also check out my book, 99, The Healthy Eating Revolution. It has so much more info on what we've spoken about today. Hey, I look forward to catching up with you again real soon. Bye for now.